I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, it's going to be a pretty big day in the shop. We're going to finally take the Chevy Nova off the frame jig, and we're going to hopefully mount the Detroit Speed QUADRALink suspension. We're going to finish out the video on that. I still have to put the trunk on the car. We just got about 2-3 days ago. The car came out of epoxy primer. If you saw the last video on this car, we installed the roof, the quarters, we welded everything up, and I went around and I trimmed out and I put in epoxy everywhere that was bare metal. You could see there still is some bare metal poking through. When I come through the gapping phase and we go to just seal up the whole car, I'll bring the SCT and we'll come past this line, this hard edge on epoxy, blend it through, and then we'll reseal the car up from there. But I know all these little pitted areas, all the drip rails and everything are sealed in epoxy really well. So like I said, first step, we're gonna cut this car off the frame jig. 2, we're going to get this car with the Detroit Speed QUADRALink suspension. We're going to finish the install on that. A lot of it is bolt-in, but we do have to weld up the shock mount. So we'll end up doing that. We might have to pull the Detroit Speed suspension back out to epoxy prime that area, or we'll do it in the gapping phase. We'll figure it out. But once we get that done, hopefully at the end of this video, you'll be able to see the Chevy Nova on 4 wheels and tires. There'll be some junk wheels and tires, but we actually should be able to get a good idea what it's looking like, and that should wrap up this video. So stay tuned. Let's try to cut this car apart and take it to the next level.
We're going to use a cutoff wheel when cutting off these jig mounts to the frame rails, the rocker mounts, everywhere else that's mounted to the Nova. We're going to use this first. I feel like we can get the most of these mounts cut off without getting too close to the frame rails or risk doing damage, and then where we have to repair the frame rails of the Nova, which are brand new. Saying that, if we have to come back through and clean up certain areas, it's not a big deal. We'll address that situation when we get. After we get the cutoff wheel, we might have to take the plasma cutter. I have it set up in the back, and we just kind of tack in a couple areas that I kind of got a little bit too tight in corners. Again, when I'm tacking these mounts on these Nova builds or any build in the shop, I try to strategically place them somewhere where I know I can cut them off. Now that all the mounts are cut off, Chase is going to help me. You can see we're just going to take a hammer and we're going to just kind of ease the rest of the mounts and kind of separate them, especially the rare shackle mounts. Those are a little bit tighter on the car, but they came right out. The Nova is off the jig, and now we could start the actual QUADRALink install. The first step in the QUADRALink setup is to get the lower links installed. This is going to be slightly different, however they will install the same if you have factory leaf spring front mounts. You can see we are using the doubler spring mounts for the added strength. Go back on a previous video and you could see how I installed those and the benefits of them. What I'm going to do right now, I'm working on the passenger side lower control arm, and you could see right now, so the bushing, the wider area of the bushing is facing inside the car, the swivel link is towards the front of the car, and the spacer bushing is on the outside. So when we go do the driver's side, it's going to be the same exact process. You could see the bushing that sticks out about 1/4 inch in the back is towards the inside. The spacer is on the outside. I flipped the link over obviously to tighten it up. So it takes a little bit. I don't think the directions are very clear. You have to look at a bunch of pictures to see exactly how all this stuff goes together. Once we get done installing the lower control arms onto the spring doubler plates or your factory stock front leaf spring mounts, we can install them on the car. You could see right there, this is exactly what I was saying about the spacer going outside. You could see the doubler plate hugs the spring just like the factory style front leaf spring mount would install. I'm going to go ahead and just install the factory 2 bolts that you would see in a factory mount first, and then that's going to get all the rest of the screw holes kind of lined up for the doubler plates, and we can start on the bottom and the top by just loosely putting in all the bolts. You could see, so I'm putting in, there's 4 bolts on the top here, there's 5 bolts coming in through the bottom of this doubler plate, and this steel plate sandwiches it between all the rails. So you could see the benefit of these doubler plates once we're together on the strength and everything else. Once we're done installing them, we can go ahead and just put in the upper control arms. This is going to be just done. The bushings go the same direction as the lower, where the part that sticks out, that 1/4 inch, goes towards the inside. We then, once we get them lined up, we can put the bolts on the inside of the car. It's a little bit challenging by yourself, but it can be done. So now that we got both the upper and lower control arms installed on the front mounts of the car, we can go ahead and slide the rear end right under the car. I'm keeping it low because I got this rear end dolly to make it a little bit easier by myself. We're going to line up the lower links first, put the bolts in there, and then once we get those in, and I know the rear end's not going to fall, or kind of it can't go forward and back because the lower links are holding it, then we can roll the top in place to the upper mounts. What I did with these mounts right now, I just left everything level how they are sent from Detroit Speed. I figured that's a good baseline to start from, and we're going to see how it looks in the car. Down the road, we will have to set pinion angle. There's a lot of stuff we still have to do on the drive shaft angle. We got to put a center section in this car and measure all that. So right now, this is kind of just bolting up the rear end, seeing what it looks like, and just making sure we have no issues. Right now, I'm installing the track bar. That's going to center the rear end from side to side. So to make sure the track bar is right, which I did try to install it and it wasn't lining up perfect, we're going to sit there and we're going to drop 2 plumb bobs on both sides of the car off the same exact spot on the frame rail versus the rear end, and we're going to measure both the inside of the rear end, and I'm also going to measure to the outside of the wheel lips itself, and then off the frame rail, which is where they're coming off of. So what this is going to do, this is going to get us close on the rear end being centered. We don't have to be 100% perfect. We'll double check this when we put wheels and tires on the car. And if you know anything about GM cars, you know a lot of these rear ends are not exactly centered in this car. These aftermarket cars now and these aftermarket parts, I feel like we could try to make them better. But again, these are just fine-tune adjustments. We're going to get everything together. We're going to get the center differential on there, see how it looks looking down the center of the transmission tunnel hump and the floor pan itself, and then that's going to tell us exactly where we want to go. So ideally, again, this is just kind of rough assembling everything, mocking everything up, and then seeing how everything looks and adjusting accordingly. If you're doing a rear end or building one of these rear ends, the key is to tack everything in place before the final weld up. Now we're going to turn our attention to coilover shocks. You can see there's a clip on the top of these Detroit Speed coilovers that allows you to put the spring on the shock assembly itself. So realistically, you want to just pull off that top snap ring that allows that top spacer to come off. You install the spring on there, and then what we're going to do, we're going to preload it just so the spring isn't bouncing up and down. You can set these versus ride height and everything else. Right now, we're going to just assume preloaded with 0 preload with no play in the spring is going to be the easiest to install, and we'll see how that looks first. I'm going to bolt on the coilovers on the bottom of this rear axle. I'm putting the nitrogen bleeders towards the back, and then we'll go ahead and tighten them up on the rear end. What we're going to do is I'm going to measure off the top frame rails on that big shock tower cross member piece we installed on the trunk floor. What the idea is, we want both of these coilovers to be centered between both of the frame rails, everything aligned in this car. Again, we are going to tack them up, see what it looks like on the ground, but I'm basically coming, I believe it was 3 3/4 inches or so off the frame rail. Then I'm also going to take my center measurement off the coilovers itself and transfer that up top, again, just to make sure everything is straight. I have seen some people slightly angle these in, and that's another option. I mean, I don't think they're really designed to go that way, but that's gonna change the spring rate and soften it up a little bit. So that might be an option. I don't recommend it if you don't know what you're doing, but ideally with these Heim joints and everything else on these coilover springs, it's best to just go straight. You want to also install them centered on this main shock tower brace just to make sure you have clearance all around. And then ideally, there should be no binding. So we're going to tack them in place. We're going to just put a couple tacks in case we have to cut them off. And then we're going to put the car on the ground, verify there is no binding, no movement. Everything looks good on the suspension, wheels or tires in the car. And then we can go ahead through and final weld everything else. So if you see, this rear end does look a little different than a normal 9-inch Ford housing. This is a 9-inch housing, but the owner opted for the floater rear end style that Detroit Speed offers. I am installing the hub end with the bearings on the end of this rear end housing. You can see it just bolts right in once we clock it. This is the benefit of a floater rear end housing, where on a normal 9-inch housing, the axle also carries the weight as it's rotating the power through the car, where realistically the hub is mounted and the bearing fixture, everything is part of the axle itself. You can see right here it spins freely and stays on the car while the axles aren't even in it. So realistically speaking, there should be no way, one, if you break an axle, your wheel won't fall off. Two, you're not losing as much power because now the axle isn't under a bending and a twisting supported weight problem. It's not trying to bind up. So there are lots of benefits of floater. This is as simple as just clocking them and bolting them on. This is going to wrap up the video. So let's take a look at this Nova on 4 wheels and tires.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up this video on the rear QUADRALink install from Detroit Speed. As you can see, this video was mostly just bolting everything together. We did have a part 1 to this video where we did a lot of fabrication and did the mounts on the car. So if you want, go back and watch that video and you could see how the whole kit's put together from start to finish. It was nice right now. Now we got the whole rear axle on the car, and I did borrow some wheels, so shout out to Dennis and for lending us some front tires, because the Detroit Speed front end, it needs, I believe it's an 18-inch or taller wheel for this car. This whole kit front to rear, I don't know if I mentioned it, has Corvette C6 spindle hubs on it. So you're also gonna need a metric lug nut on it. So that's just some stuff about the kit. I think it's really good. It's nice to have the car to be able to roll out there, kind of get an idea what it looks like out in the sun. What we're going to end up doing, we still have a lot of work to do on this car. We got the gapping, everything else, but the car's on its wheels and tires. We got the subframe connectors in it. The major fabrication has been done as far as the major chassis, all the suspension components. We do also have to set driveline angles. So now that the kit's bolted in, we're going to start getting the engine, and we're going to probably have to cut the transmission tunnel to get some of the angle out of the engine and transmission. Then we could start setting the rear end, and then once we get to ride height, the owner's also going to come up here and we're going to measure for his wheels and tires with the offset he chooses. Like I said, these are just borrowed wheels to get the car on the ground. So one more thing on this kit. I always hear a bunch of people talking about mini tubs here or there, you know, and everyone wants to put mini tubs in the car. That's great. If you want wider wheels and tires, that's a good alternative. The thing about mini tubs is, if you do mini tubs, one, you need to find some kind of kit that brings the leaf springs or brings the control arms, which we did on the Detroit Speed kit here, inside a little bit to give you some more tire clearance. So you could see with the spacers we put on, the lower bars come in 2 inches. It might be more than that, but same thing. Or you could go with the Detroit Speed rear leaf spring offsets that also bring it in, I believe it's about 1.5 inches or so. Now, once you do that and you have your mini tubs and you move your rear suspension in, a lot of people don't even think about, I see a bunch of people just put the factory rear end back under these cars. You really need to narrow your rear end. You know, once you're doing the mini tubs, you do your suspension relocation, the narrowed rear end is now, you see, even with having this factory wheel on the car, look how much it brings in this wheel and tire package right here. What that's going to allow us to do, now that's going to allow us to run a wider tire and have a wider wheel with the hub, the center of the offset basically still being somewhat center in the wheel. That's going to give you the most strength in everything else. You're not going to get a 12-inch wide wheel with 11.5-inch offset, you know, where the wheel's sticking out, or actually, yeah, 11.5 where the wheel is, the hub's right here on the tire. It's just not really possible. It's going to be too weak on the wheel. So realistically, a lot of this stuff is pre-planned. Detroit Speed, what's nice about them, they've engineered everything for their kit to work together. The owner bought this floater housing, which is going to give you a lot of benefits of hubs being bolted to the housing. If you break an axle, a wheel won't fall off. And it also, you know, has other there's stronger, there's other benefits to the floater rear ends. You don't have to go that route. I just built one recently for a 68 Camaro, almost identical to this rear end using the Detroit Speed QUADRALink kit. And we actually ended up almost the same distance. I think from this rear end, we're about half an inch narrower on his rear end because the owner wanted a slightly different offset. He wanted to bring the center of the wheel in even further to give it a deeper look to it. So I do like their kit. I think what they're doing here, this is a quality housing. I recommend people buying it. Like I said, we do build some of them that just the owners want more of a custom touch to it. So saying that, that's pretty much the Detroit Speed kit. Like I said, please go back and watch the first part of this video. We still have a lot of work to do on this Nova. We still have the drive line and everything else that we have to set angle on. We'll have to set the pinion angle on the kit itself now that it's bolted in, and once we get ride height, and like I said, the owner's gonna have to come here and we'll measure his offset. So stay tuned for a future video on this car. By the time it leaves, it should have the owner's wheels and tires rolling out on it, and we'll get a good glimpse of what this car is going to look like. So more to come on this one. There's more videos on the channel, so stay tuned for them. Please like our Facebook page, Carthage Classic Cars. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this video. It really helps us out on the algorithm and sharing what we're doing here at Carthage Classic Cars. So I'm Rick, and I'll see you next time.